clouds will sun and disaster comes. Oh my soul.
Welcome to another episode of Youth Ministry 6.3. Have with me Rusty Pettus. You'll learn a lot from Rusty. He's a great guy, does a lot of great things for us youth ministers. But we're talking about something that's very close to home. We're talking about what do you do when you lose someone you love, who's in the youth group. Perhaps you've lost someone in the youth group as well. I know you'll get a lot from this. So I appreciate Rusty coming on. We've got a new Twitter account, so don't forget to check that out. I'll put a link right below here as I speak. But also check us out on Facebook. We have a Facebook page, Youth Ministry 6.3, and like us and spread the word. Thank you so much for listening to another episode, Rusty Pettus. Thank you so much. This is Robbie McKenzie, Youth Ministry 6.3, comes from Nehemiah 6:3, says, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. I have with me Rusty Pettus. Rusty is the student minister at Graymere Church of Christ in Columbia, Tennessee. And Rusty does a lot of things. He has a pretty good blog, pettus.wordpress.com. And rustypettus.wordpress.com, and then he has a podcast that he does that I listen to on a weekly basis, and I appreciate you so much, Rusty. Thanks for being on.
Hey man, I'm glad you let me join you today.
Yep. Rusty and I are talking about something that is a little bit difficult, I'm sure, for Rusty to talk about, and many of us to deal with as well. We're talking about what does a youth minister do, what does a youth group do when you lose someone in the youth group, either through a tragedy or through an illness or through something. And Rusty, it's just something that I've been thinking about. I've never had to personally deal with it, but I know you have. And so just kind of tell me, if you don't mind, what happened in your youth group, and just kind of share a little bit of what you went through.
Right. Well, we had one of our junior girls. She was 16 years old, and it was on Valentine's Day. And she had a basketball game that evening. Her team had went out to do some stuff, and they were going over to a friend's house who lived about a mile from the school they were going to play a ball game at that night. As they were crossing an intersection, no one really knows what happened. If the sun was so bright, if she thought she could make it through the intersection. It's kind of one of those things that no one knows what happened,
Sure.
except for she was hit by a car. He was doing about 65. It was a 4-lane highway she was crossing, kind of in the middle of a section. And when they hit, she was killed on impact. There are probably about, there was one carload of students behind who saw it. There was the carload in front of her who, a couple of them, when they heard, they looked up and they saw. And then they were there, of course, on scene. One thing I didn't know at the time, I was coming back from Florence. My mom has a flower shop in Florence. And I was coming home from delivering flowers for her Valentine's Day, and I was getting ready. Dan and I were going to T-Pack for a dinner, and of course I got stuck in traffic, and I'm sitting there complaining and like, oh, this is great, and I'm going through a rant. And then I started getting phone calls, and at first I was like, this can't be true. And then when people began describing, I realized that the traffic that stalled in was actually the wreck that Mary Helen was in. So I pulled up the side, and as soon as I pulled up the side of the road, I looked over and I saw that all the cheerleaders and the entire girl basketball team was standing out in the field. And I knew it was Mary Helen's car, and at that point you're just like, okay, maybe it's just got distorted. Walked over to EMT, talked to him, and he couldn't say a lot, but he confirmed that one of the girls was passed away. And it was the other girl just luckily had minor injuries, who was in the car with her. But it was just it was a sad time, and it's something that I can't go to that intersection even today without. That's just the first thing you think on your mind.
Yeah, you've kind of alluded to a little bit. Just maybe go in a little bit more detail. How did you personally respond? And not only in as soon as it happened, but in the coming days and weeks after that.
When you first see it, you just go into shock.
Right.
I think you're still trying to process this is real, and I know the first thing I did, I knew a guy who was a firefighter, and his daughter was really good friends with the girl whose kid. They were kind of three girls who always hung out together. So I called him at the very beginning, and I just said, "Hey, Doug, listen, I need to know what happened."
Mm-hmm.
And so, being a fireman, I said, "You can call. I need you to get on the scanners. I need you to find out exactly who has passed away, who's not. I need to know the status of the other girl. She's once again good friends with all of them. They're probably looking at a senior class of about 35 students, and
Yeah.
so or junior class at that time. So everybody knew everything. And so you're just trying to process information. In the meantime, I remember everything just slows down. You don't know how fast things are happening, but things begin to go really slow when you're in that shock zone. And I remember just standing overlooking in the field and just thinking, what am I going to do when I walk over in that field in just a few minutes? You're standing by a wrecked car where they're cleaning up stuff, and then you're looking at all these girls who are just crying because they know what happened. I didn't realize then, but they had when the wreck happened, they ran out and they saw the wreck. They saw her body, and they saw what had happened, and so they saw things that they were very traumatized by. And I remember just sitting there thinking, what am I going to do as I walk over there? And you just spend a lot of time praying, like, Lord, I have no idea what I'm about to do or what's about to happen, but I've got to walk out in that ball field and talk to 20 girls who just know they've lost their best friend. And I waited till I got a phone call back from Doug so I could confirm. He confirmed within just a few minutes of what had happened. And then one of the coaches had gotten there by then, and we walked out in the ball field, and I tell you, I don't even remember what happened at that point.
Yeah.
I just remember being in complete shock, and I said a few things. He said a few things. One of us said a prayer. I don't even remember that. And at that point, we just came back to the church building. And when we got there, I'd say there's probably 20 or 30 parents who were already at our student center waiting.
Sure.
And at that night, we probably had 150 people there.
Wow.
Parents, other ministers from in town all came over. Our elders were all there. All of our ministers were there, and had people come and go in through that process then.
How did some of the youth respond? I know shock, obviously,
Yeah.
but what are some things that you saw in the coming days and so forth?
Right. Well, initially you saw that shock process, and I think that I don't remember talking a whole lot to anybody. I remember you just cried a lot. I think I cried. I don't even remember talking to anybody that night because I had to have somebody else do all the talking. I couldn't. Every time I opened my mouth, I just started crying. And so you're just in that emotional thing. And when you'd see a kid come up to the student center who'd found out everybody was coming to the church, and I just remember we just sit there and hug each other and cry. As the days went on, you have so many varied reactions. You had some kids who want to talk a lot, and they really want to share their thoughts. And it doesn't matter how close they are, because you'll have some kids who didn't even know Mary Helen, but they had a connection with her through school or through something, through camp, through some youth event. And even though they didn't know her a lot personally, they wanted to talk about things because they were faced with death. Everybody loved this girl. She was one of the kids that you bragged about in your youth group. She went on every mission trip, every retreat, everything. She was writing notes to kids all the time and dropping them in their lockers, just saying,
Wow.
Hey, I love you today. Hope you're doing well. Hey, I saw the way you put your tray up and cleaned all the food off for the lunch lady ready. She was that kid,
That's
and
awesome.
so a lot of the kids on that end were wanting to talk about it, and it was amazing how young the kids were who identified with this and were struggling. But then you have the kids who they don't struggle with it as much, and they may be in close to her because everybody grieves different.
Sure.
And they were struggling with a lot of guilt of, why am I not hurting like other people? I want to hurt. I want to struggle and cry and be tore up like these other kids are, and I don't understand why I'm not. And so you had a lot of guilt on their end. You had guilt on other kids in the youth group who just weren't close to her, who knew her but were struggling with, you got all these people who are devastated and I'm not, and I don't know how I feel about this. And so you have a lot of mixed emotions inside your youth group. You'll have people who are devastated. You'll have people who don't want to talk. You'll have people who want to spill their guts. You'll have people who struggle with a lot of guilt themselves of, she shouldn't have died, I should have died. I heard that so many times.
Right.
And then just, I don't understand why I'm not hurting as much as my best friend is.
Absolutely. Yeah. What are some of the things that, and at first when I was thinking about this, I wouldn't know where to start. But you got to start somewhere. What are some things that you did as a youth minister, as a student minister, to guide the students towards a more redemptive grieving process.
Yeah. I think the first thing we did, we just were present. I don't think you can express that enough. You don't know what you're doing. You don't even know what to say, and you will never know what to say because what do you say?
Right. Right.
And so the next day at school, all the youth ministers were there. She attended a private Christian school, so we were all there, and so were all the other counselors from the county schools. They all came in as well, and we were just spent the day at school and just talked to anybody who wanted to talk. A lot was just listening and crying with them, giving people a lot of hugs, giving them a place to talk on Wednesday night. We just came into church and said, if you want to share anything, you can. After a while, some people shared, and when that kind of ended, we kind of sat in silence for a while, and then one of the girls who was her best friend just said, well, why don't we just sing for a while? And so they wanted to sing some of her favorite songs that they knew she liked. So we did that. And then, of course, there's the funeral, and you kind of walk through that process. And a lot of it is just constantly being present and letting anyone know, if you want to talk, that's what we're here for. We also collected a lot of pictures. We have a frame that's still on our wall today out in the student center of her. It's a collage of pictures kind of that commemorates her. So that way everybody kind of had a moment to have there. We did a class on how to grieve, and I didn't know how to grieve. Right. But that's when you call people that you have contacts with. I called Bonnie Jones.
Sure.
A lot of us have contacts with the counselor, and I just called and said, somebody in my youth group has died, and I've got to show up in 3 days and do a class. And I need to know what I'm going to say. And so Lonnie spent a lot of time on the phone talking to me and coaching me of here's what you can do, and here's what you can say, and here's some resources for you to think about.
Sure.
And, I just was very honest with the kids. I don't know how to do this.
Right.
And what I'm telling you now is we just did a little class on what grieving looks like. And that some of you will walk through this very slowly. Some of you will go through this very quickly. And to just be patient with each other and not be frustrated because somebody grieved really quickly and another person took really long. And it was hard for the kids who were super close because their life wasn't moving on while everybody else's was. And sometimes the ones whose life was moving on fast, they got frustrated because they couldn't understand why the other guys just didn't get over it.
Sure.
And so we just tried to do a lot to explain that process. But more than anything, we were just trying to be present.
Absolutely. Ministry of presence. What were some of the most, and you've alluded to a bunch of them, but what were some of the most difficult things that your group, your church, that you guys had to endure, and I'm sure continually enduring during this whole process?
Yeah. I think as far as the group, it's amazing how the little things will get to you. The first time you do this that they've always been at and they're no longer at it, and your remembrance. You have we had to go and tell some of our people at church, would you please not sing certain songs?
Sure.
Because they were in the funeral, and these are 2 or 3 songs that were in the funeral, and it's a really bad trigger. Her funeral was held here at the church building, and so every time they heard one of those songs, we had kids who would get up and leave. Because it was a trigger, and suddenly they saw the casket, and they remembered. And so we had to sit down and think through some things. There's just some songs we just quit singing.
Yeah.
And a year or two later, we brought them back, but for a while, it was just one of those, we can't sing this song anymore.
Right.
And we try to, as each certain events happen, we try to have a moment where we just recognized it was there. One of the ladies organized, they planted a tree at our youth camp outside her cabin. And they did that before camp got started. They went up and got there early, and they just kind of had their own moment for all the junior and senior girls to recognize that she's not here with us, and we know this, and this is the first time. A year later, we did a memorial service and had probably about 250 kids show up for it.
Oh, wow.
And just to where we recognized it was there. A lot of them wrote letters to the family. But there's just so many things that pop up that are difficult that you wouldn't think about. It's like talking to the parents. He said, this here hurt, we thought we got past it. And then filling out the attendance card. because she had always filled out the attendance card ever since she was a kid. And when that part of the worship service came, suddenly there's a trigger that pops. And it'll happen with you in your life. You're sitting around and you're filling out all your stuff, and you realize Mary Helen's not going to lead a group this time. And so it pops up, and there's just a lot of pain that comes back with it.
Absolutely. What are some of the things that happened that were the most helpful that you saw that came as a result of Mary Helen's passing?
Right. With every tragedy, we'll usually have something that you can say, well, here's a benefit. And one thing that does happen is kids who, we had a lot of kids who realized that, hey, life is short.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of spiritual conversations in the next month, and really even longer than that. But a lot of kids were coming up and saying, this has really made me realize that it could have been me. And I don't know why it wasn't me. And I've put myself in a lot more dangerous situations, and a lot of confession.
Yeah.
Here's what I've been involved in. Here's what I've been doing, and I'm quitting. I don't want to be. I want to be with Mary Helen one day in heaven, and I'm not going to jeopardize that. And a lot of conversations like that. A lot of people got closer because you kind of lean in on each other, and you start molding relationships because of it. I think a lot more understanding. I think people look at death a lot differently. I think people see, you suddenly could empathize with people more than you could before.
Sure.
Kids who normally wouldn't go to a funeral home were at a funeral home because they realized what it meant for them. And so they started doing that for other people.
Wow.
And so that's some things that began to happen. And I tell people it's kind of a hard thing to see happening. Usually, I think you have to stand away probably a year later even to see it.
Sure. Because
in the moment, you're like, your mind's not clear, or at least mine wasn't. I tell people I was a wreck.
Right.
I've gotten to where I'm surprised I not broke down and cried now, because I spoke with this over the summer, and I broke down crying about 3 times. And but it's kind of one of those things. It can really do a lot to you. I think as a youth minister, sometimes you're affected by a lot more than you let on.
Yeah.
But when you step back, you start seeing some positives that did come from it, but there's still a lot of pain there.
Sure, absolutely. Like I said, I haven't experienced this, and you have, and I'm sure others have as well. I know others have as well, but and you can't make a perfect list, and there's no way to prepare. But what would you say are some do's and some don'ts that you would recommend for someone who loses someone tragically like this? Right.
Of course, first, just be present.
Right.
When you don't know what to say, be present. When you don't know what to do, just be present.
Yep.
And I would even tell you, don't be afraid to ask someone to help you.
Sure.
I remember going to their parents' house for the first time. I didn't know how to do that. I was, you just have this fear that locks up. And so I got somebody to go with me. And we had a member here who had lost his son when he was 17 or 18 years old.
Wow.
And so I asked him, hey, would you go? I know you're going to go see them. Can I go with you? Because you're older, you're wiser, you've been through this personally. And so he went with me and visited with them for the first time. And that kind of helped break that awkwardness of, I could sit and listen and be there, and he could kind of talk from a place of experience, and I just learned from him. And then you just learn to listen a lot. Some other things I would tell you is be who you are.
Yeah.
And you're not, if you're not a professional counselor, I'm not. Don't be one. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a parent, and so I didn't try to be somebody that I wasn't. And I would tell people, be who you are. You're a minister, and they want you there, and they're going to want to help you walk them through this. They're going to want you to pray with them. It's amazing how prayer is a comfort during that time. So when you don't know anything else to say, just pray.
Yeah.
And if you break down crying, because they're crying too. They don't care. I think they just want to see you be authentic and be real. I tell people, know when to speak and know when to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't need you to do the talking.
Right.
Sometimes silence is a good thing. I tell people, know what the Bible says about grief, and know when to share it and when to keep your mouth shut.
Right.
I don't think we really talked about anything from a biblical standpoint probably till 3 days after.
Mm.
And we prayed to God a lot, but we didn't want to come off as trying to give some cliches that people use in church.
Right.
And so when we finally brought it in on Sunday morning, it happened on a Tuesday, so we talked about it on Sunday morning in Bible class, and we just looked at stories in the Bible, people who dealt with death, and kind of how they proceeded through it. Yeah. And so, but I tell people, we've all heard the cliches, and we didn't want to start breathing that in.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Provide a place for people to where they can come. Then that first thing everybody wants to do is find somewhere where they can come to. We've had students here who've been killed in school. Sometimes they'll go to the school building. A lot of times the people are looking for a place to go to because they want to grieve together. So I tell you, open up your church, open up a place, somebody's house, wherever you can, and just be a place where everybody can come to and be a part of that moment so they can kind of have that mutual grieving together. I tell people to be comfortable expressing your own emotions. I think if I didn't cry a lot, people would probably thought something was wrong with me.
Right.
and so if you want to cry, they'll forgive you. I don't think anyone sit around and thought Rusty's less of a minister because he broke down crying 28 times.
Right.
It was a natural thing. I said the prayer to people, and I broke down crying in it. But you kind of can get some composure and keep going on. But I tell people, don't be afraid of your emotions because you need to get that out as well. And I think it's for some kids who didn't know if it's okay to cry. We had a lot of guys who would cry during those times. I tell people, help students be okay with how they feel or how they don't feel. Like I say, you'll have a lot of those conversations with, I'm confused about my emotions. Yeah. I think I should feel this way, but I don't. Or is it normal for me to be feeling this way because shouldn't I be over this by now? So I do that. And I do think it's good to know when to get help for yourself. Depending on how close you were to the student, you may be in a state of where you need help. And I can probably say, looking back, I needed to get help and I didn't. I was hurting a lot more than I even knew. My wife knew, but I just was in denial that it was bothering me as bad as she thought it was. I kept telling her she was just crazy. But looking back, I now realize, I was kind of in a bad place. I withdrew to an unhealthy degree. I would hang out with people when I needed to, but when you look back, you start realizing I spent a lot of time on the couch, didn't I? I start realizing I was sleeping 14 hours a day. And you start realizing I was going through some hard stuff because I hadn't processed it as much as I really should have.
Sure.
And I was trying to put on the strong front out front, and I wasn't letting anyone minister to me during that time. I was kind of walls. I was just trying to give, and I wasn't letting anybody give back. So I would tell people, if your wife, especially if your wife is telling you, hey, you need help, you may need to. She's probably seeing something you're not seeing. I don't think I saw it until a year later, as I kind of look back and you're like, I was really in a bad place, wasn't I?
Yep.
So
that's good. That's good. Last question. And I'm sure there's plenty of resources, but mainly, what are some resources that could help us in going through this process? But really, I'm looking for what resources helped you personally. And you mentioned Lonnie and others, but what are some resources that helped you?
The best thing that helped me was having someone who had who's done this before, because Lonnie has done a lot of crisis counseling with his work with the SWAT team, and he has had to go tell people that someone has passed away, and he had a member in his youth group die. And so from a counseling standpoint, I would tell you, if your church has a connection to a counselor, I'd really try to get in contact with them immediately, because they can help you process what to say, when to say, and how to say.
Sure.
And that will be better than any book or any video that you could ever use, because they will walk you through, and they're probably more than happy to spend time with you. And they may even offer to come. Lonnie said, if you want me to come, I'll come.
That's awesome.
And I just said, well, you know what? We may at one point, we weren't at that spot. But the other thing I tell you is, don't discount your funeral director. in town.
Uh-huh.
He's been through this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have a relationship with him, or even if you don't, if you go to him and say, listen, I'm out of my league,
Yeah.
they'll help you walk through it. I've had a funeral director before walk me through, here's what you need to consider doing, here's how to do it, and just walk me through it.
Yeah.
I would tell you, if there's other ministers in town you got connections with, ask them to come help you out. I can't tell you how many ministers came in and helped us walk through this together.
Yeah.
And they were just a huge source of strength. They were putting things together that I couldn't put together.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing things and letting me be a part of it. They kind of took the burden away from me.
That's great.
And I'll tell you that if you're in a town where that happens, don't be afraid to go over there and say, I know what needs to be done because I can see this maybe a little more objectively. And I know I had one of the guys who said, we're going to do this and this and this, and so I need you to be here at this time. He did all the scheduling for me, and I just showed up.
That's great.
So I tell you, don't be afraid to lean in on guys, and if you know what happens, don't be afraid to offer hope on that end. There's a good book that I will recommend. It's called A Gift of Hope. It's an older book. There's probably some others out there. I know YS has a book on grief, and I just couldn't find it.
Mm-hmm.
But I bought it last year at the convention. I've not read it yet, but I've got it on my desk somewhere.
Yeah.
But A Gift of Hope is by Robert, and I'll say this guy's name wrong, but Veninga. But it's just dealing with how to deal with tragedy in life, and it doesn't deal just with death. It deals with any tragedy in life. Mm. He gives a lot of he gives a lot of good practical advice. It's a little hard to read, but if if you can get through it, it's a little harder to read, but it has some really good advice in through it. And I forget what Wyatt's book is, and you could probably find it before you put the show up.
Right.
They've written a book on how to deal with death.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Rusty,
and it's a small work, so it's a small workbook, so you can get through it pretty quickly.
Yeah. Is it like now? Was it published recently or?
Last year at the convention was the first time I saw it, so it's probably been out the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Well, good deal. Rusty, thank you so much for being on. Hang on a little bit. This is Youth Ministry 6.3, number 32, and Rusty Pettus. Rusty, thank you so much.
Thank you, Robbie.